latest cover story, you and a number of your colleagues from our South Florida team broke down developer Steve Ross's big sort of world-building plan for West Palm Beach. Tell me a little bit about his plan.
Yeah, so, and I have to shout out my colleague Lydia Dinkova for really taking the charge and bringing the story idea to the table. Steve Ross's projects in West Palm are incredible in terms of scale and scope. I think he has more than 18 buildings in his portfolio in West Palm Beach, and that includes 3.8 million square feet of office, retail, restaurants, and that doesn't include the thousands of residential and hotel units he also has in development. It's a wide scale, almost like city rebuilding, reinvention project he's taken on.
Yeah, and you've been covering Palm Beach and the West Palm markets for a couple years for us now. So what do you think attracted Ross to West Palm in particular?
He has known the area for a really long time. He grew up in Miami, grew up visiting West Palm, and he's really been bullish on the area for decades. He first started building City Place, which is the multi-use district. That's kind of the epicenter of his projects in West Palm 20 years ago. I think his original plans kind of got derailed by the global financial crisis, as did many developers' plans. He really returned to it in the mid 2010s. And then that kind of coincided with the pandemic, which really just supercharged the real estate market in South Florida. So I think that kind of, established West Palm in a whole new way. And you add to that, Florida's a really business-friendly environment. There's low taxes. And also, the leadership in West Palm Beach has really embraced Ross and his projects. That they've kind of taken the bull by the horns in terms of this era of redevelopment and expansion. They're really welcoming it.
So you talked a little bit about, this sort of business-friendly atmosphere in West Palm. How have Ross's investments so far sort of rippled out to the larger West Palm market?
He has done a lot to bring in financial firms, which has been a big initiative in West Palm for more than a decade. They've had this aspirational moniker, Wall Street South. Ross's developments and the tenants he's been able to bring in has kind of given that name legs. So he's landed JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, a number of hedge funds and private equity firms. And so now I think there's more than 2,600 hedge funds and private equity firms in Palm Beach County across the board. There's been so many other developers who moved into the area as well. I think Ross kind of tested the water and proved that it was a viable market. And so now you have his friend and former business partner, George Perez, is there. David Martin's Terra is building there. That's just two of dozens of developers that have since moved into West Palm.
So as you said, this notion that West Palm is, Wall Street South, or I know Steve Ross has also talked about making it the next Silicon Valley. Those are big labels to put on this town, right? What challenges are there still standing in his way of really shaping this particular future for West Palm?
I think first and foremost, and anyone in the area will tell you this, there's a lot of infrastructure challenges there. They're worried about basic things like roads, hospitals, schools. Steve Ross actually in December landed a lease with the Cleveland Clinic. So that's going to be really transformative. That'll be the first new hospital in downtown West Palm in over 100 years.
Wow.
And he also has been really instrumental. Vanderbilt University is now planning a $520 million graduate campus in West Palm Beach, which is focused on business and technology, kind of really marrying the Wall Street South and the Silicon Valley of the future. It's still yet to be proven. Yes, it all works out.
We'll be watching either way. Thanks so much for the story, Kate. So you wrote a little bit about the upcoming year in the latest magazine, and we've survived until 2025. Tell me what that means.
Yeah, so real estate had this mantra that said, survive till 25, and in 25, things will get better. And that'll be the year that deals start to pick up.
So what would have to happen in the market to make that sort of banner year this year?
Real estate has been having some mantra like that for every year. And the next year will be the year. As I said in the piece, there will probably be another mantra make it through 25 and let it rip in 26.
Okay.
The reality is that interest rates will probably stay higher for longer. Mm-hmm. And that means that valuations have come down and that real estate just has to adjust to that new reality.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like there are some transactions happening even at lower valuations. So some people are adjusting, right? Who's hit the hardest by this?
Transaction volume is at record lows across the United States, but we are starting to see a slight pickup in New York City. Mm-hmm. There's been some deals in Midtown that are kind of notable, and that stuff is trading. Mm-hmm. And these aren't high profile things like the One Vanderbilt or whatever. These are kind of run the mill, garment center stuff.
Who's hit the hardest by interest rates staying higher for longer?
I feel like the people who have been hit have already been hit. There's this reality that interest rates are probably going to stay higher, but there's this other reality that banks and lenders still really don't want to take over these assets. And so regulators are not forcing banks to really write down these loans, or at least they don't appear to be. We are living in this new reality, but there's also still this kind of limbo, and that no one is really forced to do anything, so they're not. I think the people that are going to be the hardest hit are the people that have been well documented and have been having troubles. And it's really a matter of like when you bought the asset, because that's the other thing. All these guys, they bought real estate in the 70s and 80s, and they didn't have to do much, and they didn't have to know much. And they bought it, and they refied, and they made a lot of money. And so if you bought it back then and consistently refied and try to take your money out, then you're probably okay.
Right.
It's the people who bought later in the cycle and the people who had to get higher cost of financing initially.
Right.
So it's kind of a case-by-case example.
Yeah. Going into 2025, what are you looking for especially?
I think the one part of the market to keep an eye on in New York is this like higher end Class B stuff. There is this idea, and I put this in my story, that if you don't own the top of the line stuff, you're like a failure in life. And like you're like you failed as a real estate developer, and like you just give up and like leave and like question your life's existence. But the reality is that things don't seem to be that bad at for the rest of the Class A office, and you're starting to see trades at the top of the line next in line Class B stuff, and that's interesting because they're at a discount, but they are trading. It doesn't mean that there's no market for it, and I think that it's important to look at that because there's this theory that the ultra high-end office space has run out for tenants. And even the next step below has run out too. So if you're looking for office space, it's probably going to be in that these buildings are older, they got newer lobbies, but they're like pretty good, but there's nothing like super fancy about it. And so I think that is the asset to keep an eye on.
Thanks very much. So it's been a tough year for a lot of residential brokerages with high rates and low transactions. So for the latest magazine, you looked at some alternative revenue streams that brokerages have been looking into. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of brokerages expand into, particularly services that already touch the home buying and selling process. So you have things like title, escrow, mortgage lending, but it's definitely something that a lot of them have on their radars. And especially in the last few months, we've heard, executives at firms like Douglas Elliman and Compass kind of say that they're going to make big pushes into these arenas through acquisitions or, through starting other businesses.
Yeah. So title, escrow, what are a couple of the other sort of potential side hustles that some of these brokerages are looking to pick up?
So those are the kind of obvious ones. As a brokerage, you're already facilitating transactions, so it makes sense to go into areas that are also part of that transaction process.
Yeah.
But then we've seen some of them get a little more creative. The agency launched an art consultancy, Ryan Serhan's firm, which already kind of relies on his coaching business as part of the mix there. They did a big venture capital fundraising round. They raised about $45 million to, continue developing its AI platform, which, eventually down the line will hopefully yield some more revenue opportunities. And then you have brokerages like Nest Seekers in New York that's launched a jets and yachts division to kind of, leverage those same clients they attract.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right? In a lot of ways, it seems very practical, and especially since the brokerage business can have such thin margins, it also makes sense why they would want to diversify. But some of these businesses also have their own risks and challenges. What are some of those?
Anytime you're growing a business and kind of stressing that core business model, there's always inherently risk involved in that. And I would say, at this point, talking to a lot of executives, it is risky to not also be doing that. So, I mean, with the way that the housing market's been, there's probably not going to be a big, boom like there was during COVID again. The risk is worth the effort of, kind of going into these other areas that they maybe hadn't before, or growing in areas that they had, were only a small part of their business. One of the things that Compass talked a lot about after it acquired Properties and Christie's, executives, when they made the announcement, were really excited that they were going to bring that ancillary business, under their umbrella, with the advantage of not having to go through the growing pains of, building those businesses from scratch. They're going to bring in institutional knowledge that already figured this out. They already kind of know the lay of the land. They know how to, keep these things separate, but, working under the same vein. So it was kind of like a big deal to them to be able to do that instead of, starting from scratch. What was happening with Douglas Elliman on the West Coast is a pretty good example of, where these things can kind of get a little messy. So they acquired a pretty sizable escrow business a while ago. And earlier this year, the former founder and president of that business was suing the brokerage and his former company for allegedly offering agents incentives to use that escrow business. Of course, Elliman has denied that any agents at Elliman have ever accepted kickbacks or incentives, and because that could be potentially illegal.
Right.
And in turn, Elliman actually sued that founder for orchestrating his own kickback scheme. And both those lawsuits have been settled, but I think it just kind of exemplifies that you want as a brokerage to be able to leverage your business as, being part of the transaction process in order to it makes sense that you want to be a one-stop shop, a full service place where you can have all of these services under one roof. You do need to make sure that they are operating separately. And I think it just, while there's no wrongdoing that any, agency has said, with this situation at all, it just kind of exemplifies, that balance is delicate and that you need to really pay attention to how that works out.
There's a potential for messiness.
There's a potential for messiness. Yeah.
Right. So is the brokerage of the future really that one-stop shop, right? Broker, title, escrow, yacht. Is that where we're going?
I mean, I think talking to most of my sources, yes, it definitely seems that way. It's not all that different from any other industry. You see businesses consolidate and then they break up and then they consolidate again. So it's, it's kind of the natural order of things. So I think right now we're in a period where not only are brokerages consolidating, just brokerages themselves, but they're also, kind of pulling in all these other services under their umbrella. Maybe they'll break apart again one day. I'm not sure, but I think it's safe to say we're going to see a lot more of this in 2025.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Sheridan. So Jake, you've been covering Compass, and unlike some of the other firms we cover, they have really had a banner year this year. Tell me about that.
For Compass, I think the biggest thing for them this year has been acquisitions. When you look at how they've grown this year, it's been through making these deals. Part of that too has been, in order to make deals, you need to have money to buy these companies. Yep. This year, they've had the 3 reported quarters have had positive cash flow. So they're generating cash. And what they've done is turned around and used that cash to buy these companies. And the companies they're buying have basically made them the dominant player in a given market. They acquired Ladder and Bloom, which gave them the Gulf Coast region. acquired Parks Real Estate, which came from Tennessee. And then the biggest one, which came at the end of the year, was acquiring At Properties, which was the largest brokerage in Chicago.
Yeah.
And if you look at the growth in agent count and revenue this year, a lot of it has come from those first two deals. And I'm sure a lot of the growth that we see from them next year will come from its At Properties deal.
Yeah. Compass has historically had a lot of doubters. They've grown really fast, and CEO Robert Refkin has, really been at the helm of that, but has had to deal with a lot of those doubts. What is his attitude like now going into 2025?
I think this year you've seen a lot of those doubters become haters. I think even the people who question Compass's capabilities to do what it said it wanted to do would say that this has been a good year for the company.
Yeah.
Its stock price has gone one way, other brokerages have gone the other way. I think, though, what a lot of those haters are focusing on, a lot of the critique around Robert has been, he's been very aggressive in criticizing NAR's clear cooperation policy and NAR in general. Which, that policy basically requires brokerages to list properties, on the MLS within one day. I think that the critique has really focused around Robert putting forward this sort of altruistic notion that he just wants to help sellers get the best value for their homes. And, oh, by the way, if, that means that Compass can list exclusively on their website, then all the better. Where we've seen critiques is against Robert's pretty aggressive push against NAR's clear cooperation policy, which requires brokerages to list properties on the MLS, within 24 hours. The critics have really focused on the fact that Robert frames these discussions as sort of this altruistic pursuit of improving seller home values. And by the way, if that means that Compass can exclusively list on its website, that's great too. What I really wanted to do was marry these two ideas in this story around Compass's inventory strategy, which has been a big focus of this year. Robert wants to make Compass.com the go-to place for listings. One of the things holding him back from that potentially is clear cooperation policy, which he seems to make an Instagram post about almost every day.
Right. So with all this planned, just how big could Compass get?
I think just to level set, Compass's market share is still in the single digits. At the end of the third quarter, it was under 5%. So real estate was still an incredibly fragmented market.
Right.
I think there's also some validity to the idea that ultimately, consumers and sellers don't want to have their homes only listed on one place. They'll always want to have their homes on the MLS, or if it's not an MLS, somewhere where it's going to be seen by the most people possible. That being said, Compass's goal is to dominate specific submarkets, and real estate's completely local. If Compass has 30% of the market in Chicago, that may be enough for agents and sellers to say, I want to go with Compass over one of the other guys.
Right.
Compass's goal is 30% market share in its top 30 markets by 2030. Even if it doesn't get quite there, I don't think it's hard to see how it could get close to those numbers with a few more big deals.
Yeah. So it's an aggressive strategy. We'll continue to track it. Thanks, Jake.
Yeah.